Greetings and welcome. To begin, I want to acknowledge that the CSU Monterey Bay campus sits on the unceded land of the Rumsen Ohlone people. I'm Professor Umi Vaughan, Faculty Director of the Center for Black Student Success at CSU Monterey Bay. The center is the hub and home of Black life on our campus. We connect students with mentorship opportunities, with financial assistance, and we also provide cultural programming to enrich the environment here to help ensure that Black students succeed at CSUMB. This presentation is the first offering of the Toni Morrison Authors Conversation Series. Events in this series provide a forum to examine important issues within African diaspora politics and culture. Conversations center the concept of race and celebrate myriad walks of Black life. Tonight, we are fortunate enough to have with us for our kickoff presentation, novelist, essayist, Professor Keenan Norris. Welcome, Keenan.
Hello. Hello to you, Dr. Vaughan, and to everybody who is listening, especially the students of CSU Monterey.
Yes. I want audience members to know, especially those who are logged in watching us through YouTube, that you can ask questions of Keenan through the chat, and some of them will get a chance to even have him answer for us. So keep that in mind. Keenan, I want to ask you first, how was it that you became a writer? When did you know that writing was your path? And who are some of the authors that inspired you along the way?
Thank you. Since an early age, I've, told stories and written stories. I think the fact that I was an only child contributed greatly to becoming a writer, because I had to entertain myself. When I grew up in Southern California, Pomona, Rialto, and Highland, California, and especially in those first two stops, I didn't go to school where we lived because the schools in other places were better. And so I didn't have friends in my neighborhood. I had friends at school, but I didn't have friends in my neighborhood. And so, when I came home, being an only child, I, had to create stories and really, as I said, entertain myself. When I was a teenager, living in Highland, which is a suburb of San Bernardino, California. A lot of people might consider San Bernardino itself simply a suburb of Los Angeles, but in any case, we are a suburb of San Bernardino. I spent a lot of time downtown on East Street. For those who may be familiar with San Bernardino, downtown on East Street, there was a Black bookstore, Phoenix Books. It was run by a gentleman, Farron Roberts, who was probably my first, other than my father, he's probably my first mentor in terms of literature. And Farron ran Phoenix Books for many years, for like 2 decades. He brought Toni Morrison, for one, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Omar Tyree, who became another of my mentors, to San Bernardino, to the bookstore, or to CSU SB, Cal State San Bernardino, and introduced me to these writers and really gave me the confidence to embark on a writing career myself. So shout out to Farron.
Yes. There was a famous time when some critic asked Toni Morrison when she was going to move beyond writing about Black people and achieve a certain kind of universality in her work. And her response was never that, I'm not writing for a white audience necessarily. She was interested instead in kind of exploring the diversity, plumbing the depths of Black life and Black experience. Thinking, Keenan, about your first novel, Brother and the Dancer, I wonder what aspects of Black life are you focusing on and revealing in that work?
Yeah, so my first book, Brother and the Dancer, is about these two young Black people who are a guy and a girl, Erica in Tucson who are, thank you, who are, who meet at their college orientation and figure that they're going to get along. One, he's attracted to her and he's like trying to get with her, but they figure they're going to get along for two reasons. One, they're from the same hometown, and two, they're two of the only Black students, right, at the orientation, and figure to be two of the only Black students at the university if they both end up going there. They spend the day together and realize they actually hate each other. The story then cycles back to when they're 6 years old and tells their stories in alternating chapters to explain how they got to be so different. Right? It turns out that even though they're from the same hometown, they're from opposite sides of that hometown. And just like most cities and towns in America, their town is divided by a freeway. And though they are both Black, right, they have totally different class experiences, totally different cultural experiences. And they're both Black experiences, but they're very different ones. So I was really interested in exploring kind of a post-civil rights, the book is set in the 90s and 2000s, a post-civil rights Black experience for like the young, Black, and gifted. So the story takes place from they're 6 to 18 years old, comes all the way back around to that college choice, whether they're going to choose an HBCU or Cal State or UC. So.
Yeah. Recently, a lot of students have been talking to me about what it's like to be, say, in a classroom and be one of the only or few Black students and feel like they're called upon to represent all Black people or something. And so a novel like yours highlights how difficult or impossible that is to do because the experiences are so diverse, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, we're not monolithic. We're nowhere close to that. I mean, there's way more than just these two stories, right? Obviously, that I'm telling, I can only, all perspectives are limited, my story or the stories I tell present some perspectives that other people are not familiar with, but there are many stories that both Black stories and non-Black stories I'm not familiar with that somebody else must tell. Right. And that's why that brings me back to something else that Toni Morrison said, which is that if you don't see your story represented and you want to see it represented, you need to write it yourself.
Yes, sir. Okay. That's a great segue, Keenan, to another question I have for you. This one is, what is your writing process like? I know you teach writing in workshops across the country and also at San Jose State University. What do you emphasize in your instruction, and what advice do you offer to aspiring writers?
Yeah, I mean, so a couple things. One, my writing process is, begins with the pen and the pad. I like to write everything out by hand first, or at least get a good start on a piece by hand, because, when you have to do that physical, that deep physical movement of, of writing work, letter by letter, and your hands are cramping and everything after you're several pages in, you're earning your words in a certain way, and you care about the words in a certain way. And so I like to do that. Also, as you transfer it to the computer, you're automatically revising. And, all writing is revision, goes the whole saw. I spend, a lot of time in revision. I'm working on a novel right now. I know we're going to get to that later, but I'm working on a novel right now, and we're in deep in the revision process, me and, the editors. And so, it is a real process that you really need to devote yourself to in a committed way. So can you just run back the last part of that question for me, so I don't
I was asking, in your workshops, what kind of emphases do you put on how students should approach their own writing?
Yeah. I mean, I have a number of exercises that, for those who are listening to this, who might be aspiring writers, that you might, just do on your own. You don't really need me, over your shoulder. So one, for example, is to think about a person who's, a person from your life or a character in the world that you are, that you don't have great insight into. Maybe, this isn't like your best friend. This isn't somebody who you know deeply, but it's somebody who has been part of your experience, part of your imagination. Step into their shoes, jump into their voice, and tell their story for a page straight through first person monologue, right? I call it the autobiography of my other, which is a play on Jamaica Kincaid's novel, The Autobiography of My Mother. The idea is getting into somebody else's voice, right? So that's one. The other one, another one just for expressing a character is just imagine your character on a red carpet, walking down the red carpet, and you're describing them for the first time. Two people. It could be third person, could be first person. You could even do like a triptych where we do third person omniscient, third person close, first person, right? Or third, second, first. Describe them from each vantage point and put them on that red carpet, introduce them to the world.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. I hope my writing people in the audience are listening and taking notes. I know I am. I'm gonna try that exercise later on tonight.
Yeah. Cool.
Keenan, as you know, we're living in the Black Lives Matter era. The US is going through a time where the national belief system around race and other issues too is being questioned. There was a vice presidential debate last night, I don't know if you caught it, where it was said that the upcoming election will decide, quote, if America remains America, end quote. And however you interpret that, it's of course loaded with racial and cultural overtones.
Right.
I know that you've written some very insightful, even troubling essays about Confederate monuments, about peaceful protests by Black athletes, etc. Tell us about this other side of your work beyond the novels.
Yeah, thank you for referencing this. Yeah, I have a number of essays I've written for the LA Times, the LA Review of Books, that are political in nature, and other outlets as well. I think that, this is very important to me, obviously, as a Black person. I feel like for us, like Black Lives Matter is like, it's always been the age of Black Lives Matter, right? Not only is it now, but for the last 400 some years, it has been, this has been our fight. This has been our struggle. And so, it is good that other people are, becoming more aware of this, of the crises that have so long, beset Black America and Black people in the Americas in general. Right, not just here in the United States. What I'd like to say real specifically about my work on this is, whenever I write a political essay, I want to think about where I can intervene and where I have something unique and important to say, because my general political, beliefs are probably not that different from yours or many other people's. We're all from the same planet, walking on the same soil. But there's particular experiences I've had, particular study that I've done that, where I do think I have a unique experience. So, for example, I have an essay, Ben Carson, Thug Life and Malcolm X.
Oh, okay.
Which is about, I mean, just anybody can Google Ben Carson, Thug Life, and that's the only thing that's going to come up. Ever. So and that's about, Ben Carson's fraudulent autobiography, or at least parts of it that were fraudulent, where he's, attesting to like assaulting people. And he creates this like figment of, this hyper aggressive, hyper violent Black person. And he claims to have been that person, even though, his own family members say like he never did any of this stuff. Right. And it's this way for him of positioning himself in this role that is legible, is readable, is understandable to many Americans, no matter how false it might be, and it's this entry point from which then he can like narrate this redemption story, right? And I compare and contrast that redemption story with that of Malcolm X, who of course has a more famous autobiography, fortunately. Yeah.
For those people who don't know, there's a new Audible audio book version of the autobiography of Malcolm X, read by Lawrence Fishburne. and it gives a new kind of life to that, emblematic, timeless work. Keenan, some say things like music is the weapon. Fela Kuti said that. Of course, we have old adages like the pen is mightier than the sword. I wonder, Keenan, how do you see the role you play as a writer in the struggle for social justice? Are you a warrior? Are you an observer? Are you a healer, a moderator? How do you see yourself functioning?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I mean, I guess I see myself in all those roles, right? I mean, just as like a people is not monolithic, neither is an individual, right? Like we can inhabit different spaces. I feel like, for example, as a novelist, I'm mostly an observer because I need to tell the story. I need not only tell, my story, my unique perspective, but I need to get into the voices of these other people, right? As I said, Brother and the Dancer is told half from perspective of a young man, but also half from the perspective of a young woman, right? And so, there's a kind of channeling and transportation, psychic transportation that, one needs to affect in order to do that. And I'm not saying that I'm, perfectly able to do that, but I think it is important to be able to try to, to see, through somebody else's eyes. By that same token, just as I'm, largely an observer in that case, I'm also, an actor, whether it be a warrior or just an activist. Yeah, I mean, some of that political work is, especially the essay about the NBA boycott is more in the activist lane, right? And that's why I think it's so important, thinking about your students who are listening to this broadcast. Why it's so important to pursue this education that you guys are doing. Like I could likely publish a novel without a PhD or a master's degree. If I wrote a good enough book, I could probably do that. But some of the other work I've done, from working with students to being an editor with the Oxford African American Studies Center and building out their California archive, to to these political essays that I've written on various topics that are also historical in nature and so forth. A lot of this wouldn't be possible without my bona fides, my academic bona fides. And so, so it allows me, we're all all of us have these many selves within us, but fortunately or not, so the letters behind your name allow you to bring those other selves into the public with some weight, with some wherewithal, right?
Absolutely. Kind of returning a little bit to your writing process and your sources of inspiration, another great novelist, Walter Mosley, in one of his kind of how-to books about writing as a craft, he talks about the novel is bigger than the novelist's head. That, many of the ideas that end up making the story really live come from your subconscious. You don't know where they came from. So I wonder, can you speak of some surprises or some turns or outcomes in your novel that, speak to that fact?
Yeah, things that you just don't foresee. Yeah. Milan Kundera said something very similar. He said, novelists who are smarter than their novels need to find something else to do, need to find a new job, right? And so, so Brother and the Dancer was a set of short stories, right? What even just call it a set of short stories misrepresents it. They were just short stories, right? They weren't even a set. It just kind of like came to me, for lack of a better word, that if I were to consolidate them and hold them in tandem and in tension with one another, boy, girl, different sides of the tracks, etc., that it would create this different effect than just having them as isolate, stories out there, just floating around on their own. And so, that in itself, the structure of that book, with this newest book that I'm writing, the Confession of Copeland Kane, the Confession of Copeland Kane, I'm also in that book too. There was this kind of voice that just started suggesting itself to me. And I would never compare myself or my writing to, my foremost kind of literary inspiration, Ralph Ellison. There is this way, though, in Ellison, when he's describing it, there's this great essay where he describes his process of, creating Invisible Man, where he writes about, originally the book, for those who are familiar with it, y'all know what the book is about. The first draft of the book, Ellison wrote about a prisoner of war, a Black World War II pilot who is shot down and becomes a prisoner of war, right, of the Nazis. And, and that's what the story's about. And he said that this like disembodied voice just started interceding into his imagination, kind of mocking, comical, smarter than, than he was. And it just, he couldn't get it out of him. And it was interrupting the story. And he realized, actually, that's the story, right? Okay. And so there's this way you just have to go with, it. So, so I've had a lot of experiences like that. The thing is, as a writer, you do have to trust your imagination.
Right. At this point, I want to bring in a question from the audience. That's one of the great things about this forum. We're still able to get a little live interaction going on.
Yeah.
So an audience member, Lindsay Ochoa, asked the following. Who are your inspirations, not only in writing, but also in life? Did you always imagine yourself writing?
Yeah, great question. So Lindsay, let me start here in writing. So Ellison, of course, James Baldwin, but also, the namesake of this conversation series, Toni Morrison. And I'll say that for two reasons, not only for the writing, but also for her work as an editor, right? Yeah. So Toni Morrison was, before she ever published a word, Toni Morrison was the editor for and brought to the world, right, Angela Davis, Henry Dumas, Gail Jones, and Muhammad Ali.
Yeah.
I'm forgetting,
there's the
dome, but yeah.
The Black Book.
Yes, the Black Book. Yeah. So, I love that kind of interdisciplinarity that Toni Morrison had. Just in the world in general, I mean, I think that educators, whether that be in a college, a high school, a grade school, or, in any other field of work, are, among my, real inspirations in life. Because anybody can be a teacher, right? Anybody can teach somebody else how to do something. Anybody can give somebody the grace of not understanding something right away and saying, let me give you the building blocks to do this. Anybody of any age can do that too. You always know something. Like everybody who is on this call, right, has real and special knowledge already to offer to somebody else. But most importantly, like my mother and my father, right? And not to get too schmaltzy or whatever, but my mother and father were, they introduced me to literature. They introduced me to hard work, and sacrificed a lot for me. So before anybody else, obviously, Hiawatha and Calvin Norris.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Thank you. So you mentioned that you have this new novel coming, The Confessions of Copeland Kane.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could, without letting the cat out of the bag, tell us a little bit what that novel is about. Was it a big departure from Brother and the Dancer and other things that you've done? Give us just a taste of what you're saying in that work.
Yeah. So The Confession of Copeland Kane is definitely a departure from Brother and the Dancer. Brother and the Dancer, as you can gather from my explanation of it, is a pretty it's not a overtly political story. It is a coming of age story, and I guess that is the one thing it has in common with Copeland's story. Copeland, or Cope as he goes by, is organizes a rally against police brutality after one of his best friends, one of his childhood friends, is shot and killed by a police officer. At that rally, a police officer is shot and killed. The other organizers of the rally are all arrested. Cope is free. He's a fugitive. He contacts a friend of his who is a student journalist, and he contacts her via, encrypted means, and tells his story. I should back up a little bit. Sorry, I'm still getting used to the explaining this. The media begins to publish his juvenile criminal record, which is of course against the law, right? Those records are secret, right? But we know that this has happened in recent times with a number of, unarmed Black people killed by the police. And so in order to combat and to counteract that narrative, Copeland tells his story, right? He says he can't just tell a story because they aren't just leaving it at the case itself. He says, I can't just tell the story of what happened on that day. I need to tell my whole story. And so that's what he does. Okay.
I would love it, Keenan, if you could share an excerpt from the new book with us. I love, reading Brother and the Dancer. There were moments where I got caught up in the wordplay that you were using or the circumstance that you were kind of highlighting. So I want you to share something from the new work for us, please.
All right. It's on my phone because that's where the book lives right now. All right. They already arrested Keisha, Free, and DeMichael, snatched them up easy because police searched out their location, and then law enforcement did that criminal contact tracing thing, followed them from their phones and whatnot, bagged them up. As long as we're talking technology, boss, you might as well know my audio comes to you unencrypted in this bootleg old pre-Sage voice app, the most off-brand, unheard of cell phone app you will ever encounter. It calls itself the Cayman Island of apps. Don't ask how I got this mess on my phone, but it's all yours truly got to work with here. So you might have to trust me on this one, even if you're not trying to trust this technology just yet. Real talk, I only ask that the people hear me all the way out. It won't jeopardize y'all no kind of way, except maybe in y'all feelings. I can't tell you about your heart, but I'm gonna tell you what's in mine. Nobody want to hear why shit hit such a swerve and went so left, but the fact is, it was all kind of facts done built up to the one big fact, excuse me, edit that. The one pivotal incident that everybody and their mama cares so much about. The crime in question, the weed that worked its way up from spoil soil to choke the chief gardener. Now I'm giving testimony the only way I know how, without having Mr. Miranda's rights read to me. I'm making a real record right now, not just how that man got, but about everything that got me here. Copeland came, the alleged accomplice, the fugitive, the ghost, the rabbit, the radiated, the remediated, medicated, incarcerated, the child who fell out of colored people time and into America. The whole deal, to go against the apex predator they steady creating me into on the news feed every 5 minutes. And fair warning, I tend to tell 3 stories to tell one, and get sidetracked sometimes. But I'm gonna try and not do that shit.
Yes. I love that passage. It has the feeling of so many kinds of storytellers, but especially African-American storytellers, from griots to the people sitting on the stoop, signifying and testifying. This idea of 3 stories to tell one, a circuitous route to home base. So
yeah.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, thank you. I'm gonna get better at it as I,
no doubt.
Read out loud more often again. So.
No doubt. Keenan, I want to bring in some more questions from the audience. This one comes from Lisa Davenport. She asks, do you ever worry about your content being too raw? I always am trying to edit my writing to make it palatable.
Yeah, you should stop doing that. Okay, you should stop doing that. Yeah. Unless there is some sort of reason that you are, like you're writing for a YA audience, or you're writing for, obviously don't, like we all have home training, but, if you were writing for yourself, if you were writing for an adult audience, there's no reason to censor yourself. Don't, right? Neither in terms of the words you choose, but more importantly than the words, the content you choose, the larger ideas behind it, behind the story that you're telling, because, when we start to like block ourselves off in those ways, block our thought off, we're not really telling, the truth of our experiences or the truth of our minds. So,
Yes. Let's bring in another question. This one from Tatiana Oliveira. She says, I've always felt the need to be perfect when telling the story of my people, which has made me too scared to write at all. I don't want to get the story wrong. Have you ever felt that kind of pressure?
Yeah. I think I understand where you're coming from with that, especially because we know, like within POC groups, Black folks, you know, Mexican folks, people from various other parts of the world that like our folks will check us if we if we get it wrong, right? And so we always have that, not just like getting it perfect might not mean like the characters have to be morally perfect, but that like I have to get all this exactly right. I have to get every reference to Oakland or LA or whatever exactly on point, or else somebody, my uncle and them are going to come after me on that, right? And so yeah, I mean, there's a way that I understand that. But again, you can't be afraid of kind of telling your own story, exploring your own imagination, and even some ways that like your story will diverge and not be quote unquote perfect, to the to maybe the majority, even like the majority within your neighborhood, right, or the majority within your family will tell something that's unique to your experience, unique to your mind. And so you really have to kind of guard that and not feel like you want to like kind of reach consensus, because then anybody can tell that story.
Yeah.
You don't want to tell that story.
Okay. Keenan, why don't you let us know when that new book will be released, and also give us some advice for not only aspiring writers, but aspiring authors. So this process of connecting with an agent or with a publishing house and that part, if you could speak to it.
Sure, yeah. So my book, The Confession of Copeland Kane, will be published in June 2021, so June of next year. Yeah, in terms of getting forward, with your work to where you can get an agent, get published. Yeah, the first step is getting an agent. There are various ways of going about that. My first agent I got through like cold calls and just saying my work in cold. That is, without any any recommendations or anything like that. I would not suggest that, right?
Okay.
I would suggest going in with some sort of backing. So it's good to make relationships. It's good to like with any business, relationships are part of it. It's those relationships and connections can be formed through through the university system, also through writers workshops and festivals for Black writers. This is where this is the Center for Black Student Success. I strongly recommend the Callaloo Writer Workshops. Right, I I started this book, this new book, through the Callaloo workshops. Callaloo has 3 workshops here: one at Brown University, one at the University of West Indies, I believe at the Jamaica campus, and one at the University of Oxford in London. And so it's all Black diaspora, all African diaspora writers. The level of writing that I encountered in those workshops was several times higher than in the MFA and creative writing programs that I had experience of, right? Because you're talking about a worldwide. We had folks from the continent, we had people from Europe, we had people from the Caribbean, right? People from all parts of America and Canada. It was just a wonderful experience. Nafisa Spires Thompson, who's from one of my hometowns, Rialto, California. She was in that same workshop. She was nominated for the National Book Award a couple of years ago for her book, Heads of the Colored People. And so, yeah, well, so that's a way. There are more local workshops and so forth. The Squaw Valley Writers Conference in Lake Tahoe. I know a number of people who got agents through there. The Bread Loaf Writer Conference. There are a lot of writers conferences. I'd also suggest just going to, right now because of COVID, we can't like physically go to these places, but tuning in to like Litquake, which is a local literary festival that's actually coming up in a couple of weeks. Just LIT Quake, right? Litquake, all one word. Just look it up. Chime into some of those, zoom into some of those events.
Yeah.
Be a part of that. And you can start to meet writers who can then, hook you up, get you readings with agents. What you need with a novel or with a short story collection, you need a full, complete book. It doesn't have to be perfect and perfectly ready for publication, but it does need to be done, okay? In like full first draft form to get an agent. And then from there, of course, the agent then will take it to editors and all that. We'll take it to publishing houses. Don't pay the agent up front, okay? For those aspiring writers, agent gets 15% of domestic, 25% of foreign, in sales, right? Or the what do you call it? I'm losing my, what's the word? Royalties from sales. And so, but you don't pay agents up front. They work on commission, right? So you get an agent, move forward. Self-publishing is also another avenue. As I said, one of my mentors, Omar Tyree, has one of the most inspiring stories of self-publishing out there. In fact, he tells that story in a book I edited, Street Lit Representing the Urban Landscape. Omar wrote the foreword to it. For those who are not familiar, Omar Tyree, author of Fly Girl, a number of other, Do Right Man, etc. He was a best-selling author back in the 90s and early 2000s. Omar started out publishing his own work, right? Like printing, binding, pressing, and distributing his own work, and sold thousands of copies of his books by himself, and then went to the publishers, went to Simon & Schuster, the biggest publisher in America, probably in the world, and said, I'm already making money. Do you want in on this? So it's a very powerful story. I wouldn't knock that. But that is, then you're just twice as smart as me, as the rest of us, because you're both business-minded and artistic.
Yes. So maybe a final question for you, Keenan. We've hung out before, and I have this sweatshirt that says Octavia Butler tried to tell us, right? Mm-hmm. She, of course, is a sci-fi author. I think the first African-American sci-fi author, at least to gain great fame. And two of her most important books are The Parable of the Sower and The Parable of the Talents, that talk about time, set in the 2020s and on, that's eerily similar to what we see in American society today. So as a visionary, as one of our thinkers, I ask you, what will become of us, in the midst and coming out of the current cultural crisis?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this, a lot, as I think we all have. I do kind of want to come back to something you mentioned from the debate earlier, that, this, idea around, that you were quoting, that, will America even be America anymore? And I think the thing is, America has always been contested, right? Like there isn't one American story. There's this whole push now by the Trump administration to delegitimate the 1619 Project, right? And to even investigate educators and educational institutions that teach the 1619 Project, which, just so we're clear, is a suppressive tactic, right? It's a censorious tactic. It is the forerunner to actual censorship of intellectuals. Actually don't have a problem with their, with the idea of a patriotic education that they want to like forward, if people want that as their, as long as it's factual, I don't really have a problem with, them presenting that, because there are multiple American stories, right? But you can't tell the Black American story without telling the stories of slavery, of all the stuff that we all the things we've had to overcome, right? Which are which are multitudinous. And so with that being the case, it does an injustice to us to to try to reduce our story to to patriotism, or to invisibilize the culprits of our of our disenfranchisement, right? As far as the future, I do think that this, unfortunately, like these conflicts are being intensified right now, and there's some phenomena, particularly COVID, that nobody asked for, that are also intensifying in inequalities, historical inequalities in healthcare, in in just standard of living, that are just becoming brutally exposed right now. And so people are conscious of all this. Like, I don't need to go into detail about these things because y'all already know about them. That's why there is a shirt, Octavia Butler tried to tell us, right? Because people are aware of the, widening gaps, they're breaking between us. I don't know, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't think that that this kind of racial animosity that is, has been brought to boil can remain. I don't think we can remain in this state for long. I do think that that these kind of forces of extremism will be blunted, but I think that kind of going past that, we do need to we do need to continue to prioritize the marginalized, and for Black folks, we need to continue to prioritize our own health outcomes, our own economic independence, well past these crises, because as totalizing as they seem, like you and me both, Dr. Vaughan, like, we've lived through enough to know, like, this moment will pass, right? But the struggles that Black people have been going through for 400 plus years will not end just because Donald Trump leaves the office of president, right? The things that we suffer from in this country and around the world are transpolitical, right? They're not respecters of the Democratic Party or the Republican Party or any other party, right? So we need to, we need to be mindful of that and not like pin our hopes on, an election or on a particular policy.
Yes, sir. Well, Keenan, I want to thank you for sharing your presence and your ideas with us. It's wonderful talking with you. If you have any last message for us, please share it now.
All right. So first of all, I really want to thank the Center for Black Student Success at CSU Monterey for giving me this, this opportunity to speak with y'all. I'm really, grateful to Dr. Vaughan. I just want you guys to, if you are aspiring writers, to, have the confidence in yourselves to put your work out there, and also the confidence in yourselves to accept the constructive critiques that you get, and to try to learn from that, and to push yourselves to be the best artists, the best thinkers, the best intellectuals that you have the power to be.
Yes. Okay. With that, I want to say thanks to our sponsor, Chevron, who will help make this event possible. Shout out to all the students at CSUMB, wherever you are, especially the CBSS family. I want to give acknowledgement to the CBSS action team, Brian Corpening, Professor Vanessa Lopez Littleton, Najoni Chow Garcia, and Bernadette Ortiz. Also, our producer, Sonia Pina. And again, thanks, Keenan Norris. All the viewers, you need to know that CBSS is supported by donors and sponsors like you. So we encourage you to support so we can keep this going on. Lastly, check out our next event, which is coming up on October 22nd from 6 to 7:30 p.m. Why Black Money Matters with Mecca and Kwesi Dreams. Thank you very much.